Good evening, everyone. I will kick off, since my introduction is definitely the institutional, uninteresting one. But still, I am here. My name is Sofia Gotti, and I'm here in the capacity of the co-lead of the MA Curating program here at the Courtauld. And at the end of the academic year, the students in this program are tasked with realizing exhibitions in venues across London. And this event tonight was born in conjunction to the Stairway That Separates My Home From My Memory, which is a group show held at the Nicoletta Fiorucci Foundation in Chelsea, featuring work by really an astonishing list of artists, from iconic figures linked to the British Black art movement like Mona Hatoum or Zinab Sadira, to emerging voices like Mark Christoph, who is currently in residency at Gasworks. So this collaboration between MA Curating and the Nicoletta Fiorucci Foundation was born thanks to Nicoletta Fiorucci Russo's generosity in wanting to support and platform the voices of a new generation of curators. So it really is thanks to collaborators like Nicoletta that we're able to inspire and captivate our students who will be future leaders in our fields. So my first thanks are directed to her, even though she's not here. But I'm of course, immensely grateful to all those who have supported us in bringing this ambitious exhibition to life, especially curator Giulia Civardi and curatorial assistant Tom Muna, who's here somewhere, as well as further partners, including the Fondazione Between Art and Film and the Institute of Contemporary Arts, who hosted a screening last night. On Saturday. I would like to thank all the speakers who have joined us here at the Courtauld this evening for this wonderful panel about artistic mobility. And finally, I really would like to congratulate the students of this group working on this exhibition: Benedetta Cirulli, Olivia Lassa, Grace Nicholson, Anne Leckie, Lily Sawyer, Eloise Shevin, Natalie Sogomonian, Helen Stark, Freya Thomas, Zeynep Ugan, and really on their outstanding work, which has gone above and beyond expectations. I've said this more than once. Thank you so much, and I will leave the podium to Zeynep.
Thank you, Sophia. Thank you very much for joining us today for the final event of our public program for the Stairway That Separates My Room From My Memory, an exhibition kindly hosted by the Nicoletta Fiorucci Foundation. We are very grateful to the Courtauld Institute, and I'm not sure if they're here, but Leila and Diego from the research panel team for their support in making this event possible. We are very also honored today to have with us Robert Leckie, Director of Gasworks, Mark Christoph, Resident Artist at Gasworks, Giulia Civardi, Curator and Collection Manager at the Nicoletta Fiorucci Foundation, and of course, artist Taishani. So after visiting the Nicoletta Fiorucci Foundation in January, we were inspired by the domestic atmosphere of the foundation, and unlike in a traditional or institutional exhibition format, we wanted to discover further how home is recreated both physically and metaphorically within a curatorial context. This felt particularly relevant in light of ongoing concerns surrounding migration, displacement, not only for artists, but of course for the wider global community. So here I'm going to share some of the install shots from my exhibition. And as part of our curatorial research, we first also discovered Zimbabwean artist Violet Huami's print in the private Fiorucci collection, which is, there's a kind of focused image of it on the right, because it's in that image, it's on top of the fireplace. And we realized that this first edition lithograph was produced by the artist during her first institutional exhibition while she was a resident at Gasworks. In her work, Zombene Karwe, the artist represents the bull capturing the crocodile. Karwe, little crocodile, was a nickname for Emerson Mnangagwa, the Zimbabwean president who came to power in 2017 following the coup d'etat that brought down President Mugabe after 37 years. The work suggests that political power is ultimately accountable to the people. We understood that these political, social, or personal histories from their homeland were deeply ingrained in the artist's works throughout the exhibition. Home serves as an ongoing source of memory, identity, as well as artistic practice and research. And of course, the ability to imagine an alternative home when one is away from home became a key point of discussion for all of us. When thinking about our research for an event, we decided to focus on what home, safety, stability, and mobility might mean for artists today. This prompted us to think about the role of artistic residencies and the support of nonprofit organizations who offer artists a home away from home, and how could we collectively devise a model that foregrounds the needs of artists and elevates their voices and sustains their practice. A 2022 policy and research report titled Reimagining Mobility for Artists and Cultural Professionals by UNESCO states that increasing travel costs, ongoing political turmoil, tightening immigration policies, as well as unequal distribution of funding remain as major limiting factors in artistic mobility. Here, residencies and nonprofit institutions play a huge role in contributing to outward mobility, in addition to enabling artists to acquire new knowledge, experiences or skills, create new audiences, access jobs, and potentially co-create or collaborate with peers. However, 79% of artistic residencies are still based in Europe or North America, and south-to-south mobility for artists remains difficult, raising concerns about the reinforcement of a center versus periphery dynamic. Oh, sorry. There's a welcome. So returning to today's panel, Gasworks was established in 1994 as part of the Triangle Network. It is a non-profit contemporary visual arts organization and has supported more than 600 artists from over 80 countries. Funded by the Arts Council, as well as a group of institutions, patrons, and supporters, Gasworks operates on an open call policy, providing up to 16 residencies each year, inviting emerging international artists to work alongside a community of 9 London-based peers for 3 months. Gasworks also provides studios for London-based artists, commissions emerging UK-based international artists, to present their first major exhibitions in the UK. Some of their prominent alumni refer to Chris O'Filey, Yinka Shonibare, Sonia Boyce, Ibrahim Mahama, and also, of course, Taishani, who is here with us today, who was a resident between 2015 and 2020. Robert Leckie is director of Gasworks. He was previously director of Spike Island in Bristol from 2018 to 2024, and curator at Gasworks from 2011 to 2018. Over the past 15 years, he has created major solo shows and survey exhibitions, and has also co-edited and contributed to many publications, including Donald Lockheed, Resistant Forms, which was published by Camden Arts Center, Spike Island, and Icon Gallery. He was also a jury member for the 2022 Turner Prize. Mark Christoph is a current resident at Gasworks and has kindly contributed to our exhibition with a sound piece titled Puri Gading. This is not work, but born in Jakarta, Indonesia, Mar lives and works in Bali. He is a visual artist with a practice that spans painting, sculpture, video, and installation. Mar works with personal and found archives. He engages this material through processes of fragmentation, displacement, and layering, alongside shifts in scale and format. Rooted in an inquiry into the fragility of memory and its susceptibility to manipulation over time, his work dissects and recontextualizes the archive through a reconstructive approach. Home is a recurring theme within Mark's work, and this is an image from Dahlia 23, a site-specific installation the artist made with mixed media and personal ephemera relating to the architectural memory of the artist's childhood home. Moving on to the Nicoletta Fiorucci Foundation. The foundation is a non-profit arts organization that supports artists through site-specific exhibition projects, promotes experimentation in contemporary art and design with a focus on intermedia, site-responsive, and community-oriented approaches. Founded by collector and arts patron Nicoletta Fiorucci and structured as an archipelago of homes and spaces across Europe, the foundation operates between London, Milan, and Venice. It supports artists and cultural institutions through exhibitions, events, publications, and residencies. In 2025, the Nicoletta Fiorucci Foundation launched the Foundation Prize at Frieze London with Alex Margot Arden as its first recipient. These images are from a recently launched new hospitality project in the south of France named La Casa degli Artisti. Artists in residence will live and work there between 2 or 4 weeks at a time. Ms. Giulia Civardi, since 2020, Giulia Civardi has been curator and collection manager at the Nicoletta Fiorucci Foundation, where she works on collaborative exhibitions, commissions, and collection research and care, with a focus on overlooked perspectives in contemporary art and design. Recent projects include the second show at ICA Milano. She has lectured on art and culture at St. Martin's Goldsmiths University, the Courtauld Institute, as well as institutions based in Italy. Her writing, spanning essays, fiction, and critical texts, has been published by Mycelio, Nero, Flash Art, Cura, Stigliane Editoriale, among others. Now I'm going to go back. Sorry about this. Last but not least, Taishani's artistic practice, comprising performance, film, photography, and installation, uses experimental writing as a guiding method. Oscillating between theoretical concepts and visceral details, Shani's texts create poetic coordinates to cultivate fragmentary cosmologies of marginalized non-sovereignty. Taking cues from both mournful and undead histories of reproductive labor, illness, and solidarity, her work is invested in recovering feminized aesthetic modes, such as the floral, the trippy, or the gothic, in a register of utopian militancy. Her long-term projects work through historical and mythical narratives, such as Christine de Pisan's allegorical City of Women, or the social history of psychedelic ergot poisoning. Taishani is the joint 2019 Turner Prize winner, together with Lawrence Abuhamdan, Helen Kamok, and Oscar Murillo. Her work has been shown extensively in Britain and internationally. Thank you all so much. Now I think we'll continue with panel discussion. I think if that's okay, we will start with you, Giulia, since the exhibition is also at the Nicoletta Fiorucci Foundation. And I guess after our conversations and the exhibition, making together that process, we wanted to find out how the Nicoletta Fiorucci Foundation kind of offers a home for artists and supports their productions through your operations.
That's a very good question, especially as you mentioned, Gas. There are two ways in which, well, many ways, but I guess I can talk about a couple of ways in which we offer support and a home away from home for artists, as you ask. The example of Grass is an example of a residency that is not quite a residency in the sense that it doesn't have an application process. It doesn't have a set period of time. It works more in the form of hospitality and as an artist retreat or researchers retreat. Oftentimes, the artists or the people who visit stay for an amount that can be 2 weeks to a month, and it's usually linked to conversations or relationships or friendships that we have. Artists that have worked with the foundation, not necessarily that part of the collection, but that may be part of it. Here in the photos, we see, for example, Camilla Rowe, the sculpture in the middle. Camilla Rowe is an artist that we've worked with for many years, even before Nicoletta Fiorucci Foundation was began in 2020. Camilla Rowe was the artistic director of one of the festivals, Vulcano Extravaganza, part of Fiorucci Trust, and here her presence in Gas was in an official residency, but she came to see the park, to interact with the space, and then ultimately envision the work as part of the landscape. And then there's an image as well that maybe I wanted to show. That maybe if we go back to the park, it's not visible here, but another example of an artist who came to Graz to not only install a work, but to really work with the garden is Augustas Serapinas, a Lithuanian artist. Again, we've supported in different ways. We supported an exhibition that he had at ICA Milan. We acquired a few of his works, and then he realized a piece here in London, but that then was moved to Graz, and it was a wooden structure that could hold chamomile and other plants to make soup. And that was adapted to he needed to work with the vegetation of the site, and so he talked with our gardeners, and he did research on site, and that is a way in which maybe he went on a residency in Gus, even though it wasn't a formal invitation. So I feel like a lot of the residencies that we do, or the hospitality we give, it's a cross-pollination of ideas that come from other projects and ongoing conversations. And then maybe in the next one. Yeah, I can talk about also the image on the left is a wall painting by artist Maria Loboda. Initially, this wall drawing was made for the space we have in London. But then when the Casa degli Artisti, the artist house, was ready, we installed it here in London, and Maria Loboda came to spend time in Graz to redesign it specifically, responding to the colors of Graz. So again, artists come and interact in various ways. Some just visit and maybe they produce drawings or works inspired by the landscape, and some just pass through and maybe take a time to retreat to think about their upcoming projects. So there isn't a necessity for a physical outcome at the end of the stay. And then another example, because here on the right-hand side, we see an image of Gian Peruchini's commission for Art on the Underground. Gian Peruchini is an Italian painter, and he works with a gallery here in London, Corvi Mora. And he's an example of an artist that we've had in residency, but again, who didn't produce anything for us. He stayed in London at the foundation over a period of 3 months on one trip, and then he came back, and during this time he could get to know London, because he had never really lived here, and he wanted to get to know the city before we realized this really important large commission for a Brixton station. So again, that was a way in which we provided hospitality and just a space for artists to develop work and to think and rethink the practice.
Yeah, I think here maybe it's also important to note that the Nicoletta Fiorucci Foundation doesn't do an open call, but actually it gives this opportunity to artists that they're already in conversations with, which is also great because it's a very personal interaction with the artist, and there isn't this pressure of, about an exhibition or creating something at the end. So it's like an ongoing supportive environment. And also you told us kindly about your very interesting collaboration with Thai's work and how some of her works came to being after even though there's also a history with Gasworks, which we'll come back to, but maybe since you're talking about this, you could also tell us a little bit about how that dialogue was created with Thai.
Yes, this is a very good point, because actually when we worked with Thai in many occasions, and one example of how we maybe gave a home to Thai's work is when this was our first, we acquired other pieces by Thai before. There were editions from Gasworks, actually. But I remember when we went to Thai's studio for the first time with Nicoletta, and Thai was showing us her work, and then at some point she showed us these drawings that were very special to her. And I remember that you mentioned that you wanted to find a home for these drawings, because they had to be shown together and obviously you were thinking about what the care process would be over time for these drawings, paintings. And I remember that then we had a discussion, and then we acquired these works, which have then been requested for loans multiple times, and we put that process of home in motion for the paintings. And of course, maybe you can share a bit about them.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, it's nice to see them. So I think Nicoletta first acquired a work that was part of a Gasworks kind of thing, but it wasn't an edition, it was a painting, but it was, I think, one of the first works that I sold. I started selling work, I mean, I'm very honest about my career practice, whatever. I started painting during the pandemic, and I just put them on Instagram, and people started buying them. And that was kind of how I started selling work. But Nicoletta was like the first person that bought like a more serious painting. And when I finished these, they were very important to me. I wanted them to stay together, as he said, but more than that, I was quite concerned about the possibility of them being shown. I wanted them to be, because they're part of this bigger body of work called the Neon Hieroglyph, and they're the illustrations that were in a book that I published about the project. So they correspond to the 9 kind of passages around this history of ergot, which is a fungus that LSD is synthesized from. So I really wanted to know that they would be accessible, and that was one of the really amazing things I knew is always the case with the foundation, is that they're open to loaning the work, which is really, I think, important to a lot of artists, especially when someone's acquiring. I mean, you know, what consists of a seminal work is very debatable, but like for me, it was a seminal work. It was something that was important to me, and so I was very happy, and the support over the years has been really amazing, from like kind of strange things, like I shot a film in London, and one of the main actors was coming from Malaysia, and she stayed in the flat, which was like a really brilliant way to make it possible, really, and feasible for me to do the film. So it's been an ongoing kind of conversation, and one that I'm really happy started, and also that gave me a lot of belief, because I really liked the collection before. When Nicoletta brought this piece, I felt very happy about it. Yeah, made me feel good.
Thank you, Tai. And we will definitely come back to your practice as well, of course, and how it relates to home. But maybe now it's a great time for Robert to pitch in, and I think it would be great for us to learn a little bit more about Gasworks, because it's a very different and very big structured institution. It's a non-profit, of course, but maybe a little bit more about the open call and how that relates to your vision for support.
Sure. Can you hear me okay? It's weird, I can't really hear myself echoing back, so
Is it on?
I'll trust you, I think so. So thank you so much for the introduction, and as I said at the start, Gasworks hosts many artists from all over the world. Mara's one of them, and we like to think that when they spend time with us, they do form a kind of temporary community, and Mara is in residence right now with artists from Ghana, Argentina, Spain, and Brazil. They live together in a shared house that, as of about a month ago, we now own outright, which is amazing. They have a studio at Gasworks, which is 24-hour access, and they really do build this kind of temporary family, as I'm sure Mark can talk to you a little bit about. And all of the residencies that we do 20 a year, and they are all open calls for artists from different countries or regions of the world. So it's very interesting seeing the graphic that you had up of like where artist residencies are. I would love to see one for where artists come from to those places, like the other way around. And all of the residencies are funded by trusts and foundations, individuals, groups of individuals that have an interest in supporting artists who are often from their kind of home country or nation. A lot of the supporters are people that actually live in London, but are maybe from Brazil, for example, originally, or from other places originally. And some of the partnerships have been ongoing for a very long time. So we have ongoing relationships with trusted foundations in India and Pakistan who've been sending artists on an annual basis for over 20 years at this point. And then others are a little bit newer. So in the last 5 years, we've been doing Southeast Asia, and actually MA's residency is the fifth and potentially final of a ongoing series of residencies for artists from different Southeast Asian countries. So we've done kind of targeted calls over the 5 years for artists from Vietnam and Indonesia and other places in the region. And the open call model, I think, is interesting to us because it's something that sometimes people are quite snooty about, and I think that there is a notion that like it's not always necessarily the best way to like support artists, because obviously they do have to apply and it requires something of them, and inevitably lots of people apply who are unsuccessful. So to give you a sense of the kind of numbers, I mean, for some of the least populated countries, we'd probably get at least 60 applications. For some of the most populated, we would get upwards of 500. So we're having to deal with a lot of different applications from artists all over the world, which is both inspiring and also slightly depressing because you realise that you can't offer opportunities to everybody, but it does often give you a really, really interesting understanding of a kind of cross-section of a scene in a particular place at a particular time. And so recently we started a new residency partnership where we're supporting artists based in Georgia, Armenia and Iran over 3 years. And it's been really interesting, for example, in year one, to get the applications from Georgia, and it's not a country that we are particularly familiar with or know the scene well in. And yet it really gave us an amazing kind of understanding of like who the artists were. You know, you could kind of sense like who was friends with who, where the interesting project spaces were, like how things were making, how people were making stuff happen in a context which is not always that easy to make stuff happen, particularly on a kind of like, you know, public basis, let's say, or like, you know, doing project spaces with your friends. And so it's a model that, whilst it's quite labour intensive, both for artists and also for us as an institution, we feel that it opens us out to learning about artists and scenes that we otherwise just wouldn't encounter. Like Ma, for example, like I never knew about Ma, as wonderful as he is, until he came. And it is really that...
Neither did we, so thank you.
And it really is that opportunity to like to discover and meet these people. And as I said, they form this temporary community, and you know, we have the residencies program, so there are 5 residents with us at any one time. There are also 8 London-based artists that have studios semi-permanently, so the Etel was there for 5 years, and 5 years is the limit. And they're not conceived of as residencies in the same way, but it is really important to us to have an active community of artists in the building who are practicing, and the international artists come in and they engage with that, because of course we have a small staff team that work in the offices, but there are also artists that are like making stuff. They're like, they know where the like kilns are, they know where to get photos printed, they often like spending time with the visiting artists and looking after them, they know where the cool openings are happening. And so it really does help to kind of facilitate this this extended kind of family feel. And for me, you know, I worked at Gasworks for many years, and then I went to Spike Island and I came back. And one of the reasons I came back is that this sense of being in a community of international artists that really, genuinely speaking, are like really happy to be in London and happy to have this, what we call the Holy Trinity, time, money and space to make their work and to concentrate on it, is really a total privilege. And so as a staff team, we learn so much from them too. They teach us so much about, you know, about art, yes, but also about life, about kind of cultural scenes in different places, and yeah.
Amazing. And Mark, so upon entering your work on a visit on Gasworks studio visits a few weeks ago, I guess a few months ago now, with the Courtauld Institute, we felt this immediate resonance between our exhibition team and your practice. And we just wondered if maybe you would want to elaborate on how was the concept of home, how has it accompanied you in your practice and during your residency here in London?
Thank you for the introduction as well. I guess by spending time here, I've kind of like revised my own understanding of what home is, and I guess I would see it as more as like this condition as opposed to like a fixed location. I think also just to touch back on the work that's showing at the foundation now, Courtauld, it's basically just me revisiting my childhood home 7 years after my own father passed. And I think that's just that one moment in my whole life kind of affected how I view this word or this idea. And I think just from being here in an entirely new environment, it's kind of been an invigorating experience, if that makes sense. But I don't know if that really answers the question.
And how's your idea of what you wanted to research and the projects you wanted to do, have they changed when you actually started the residency, or has the experience of being in London kind of in any way contributed?
Well, I initially came into this residency with a very fixed, like semi-abstract concept of what I wanted to do. And after, I guess, spending like a month or so,
It's still very new, right?
It is still very new, but I guess I kind of just let the work decide where it's going to go, which I'm usually kind of against that notion. I'm somewhat a bit of a perfectionist, I'd say. Double-edged, it's a bit of an annoying trait to have, but I think I initially came in with wanting to study these certain objects and artifacts that were quote-unquote collected by a lieutenant governor of the British East India Company, Stamford Raffles. Indonesia's colonial history is often associated with the Dutch, but there was a period in the early 19th century where the British actually intervened and ruled. And during his tenure there, Stamford Raffles collected over 2,000 objects, which are now currently housed in the British Museum. And I eventually just wanted to go in there and study and see this project from a very academic or historian point of view. But I think after just like letting myself immerse in the scene in London and seeing all these shows that have kind of informed my way of thinking in so many different ways, just the trajectory of the research project shifted more into the actual poetics of extraction, of collecting. I probably should have showed a photo of the open studios and stuff, but I had a reference wall in which I just kind of plastered all these images and of different visits I have to the museums and the shows and art museums, but also historical museums as well. And I'm kind of just treating this whole research project as a field collection to a certain extent.
And your residency is finishing very soon?
In 9 days.
Okay. Well, this is something maybe we wanted to ask you about as well, because reading Ty's biography, your residency was very long. How does this kind of time difference?
Yeah, so I tried to explain this before, but so Ty kind of wasn't really a resident. So we have the international residents, and then we have the studio holders. So the studio holders who are London-based have the studios for up to 5 years, and historically they've always paid rent, so Ty did pay rent. And then in the past couple of years we've introduced a studio bursary model, and so these are fully funded studios for London-based practitioners for up to 3 years that are supported by individuals or trusts and foundations. So the interaction is very different. I think that, you know, the London-based community are like practicing artists in their own right, doing things independently. and we support them where we can, but generally speaking, they kind of get on and do their own thing. Whereas with the international visiting artists, it's a much more structured program. And so we bring curators to visit them, we take them on trips, like out to see galleries in London, or to go on national trips. You guys went to Margate. And so it's a kind of different form of interaction. And of course, they get accommodation, London-based artists don't get accommodation, etc.
Okay. Because, again, we read that you've also done a residency, for instance, at Somerset House. So I guess we were just wondering if you felt that in the long term, in looking back to your career, how residencies kind of gave you this sense of support, if they did, and what your experience was.
I think Somerset House call it a resident. It's similar to Gasworks, so you pay rent, and I think there's a selection process around who can have a studio there, but which is the same at Gasworks as well. But apart from that, it's very much renting a studio in a way. But you similarly at Somerset House, there are also different kind of models that run concurrently. So you do have the opportunity to meet people, that are there for shorter periods that often aren't based here, for example. I actually was there for a much longer time. It was COVID. Things got. I haven't done many residencies, I have to admit. I think there are many reasons for that. I do like working with. I make all the work myself, which means I need a lot of my things with me, and it's a very material practice in a way, even though it has other dimensions to it. So I do need a lot of things with me, which means that I'm quite drawn to being in my own studio, I guess. But also I think that there are different points in your life where artists really have very different needs. And I think that a lot of residencies, as wonderful as they are, I don't know if they completely cater to people in different places in their life, not just career, but also, people with families or care duties or introverts even, because there's a whole aspect of performativity that you have to do when you're doing residencies. You have to do videos, you have to meet people, you have to have dinners with the other residents, you have to do all of the things that not everyone is cut out really for. So for me, I did one residency proper, that was the Wising one, and it did come at a really pivotal moment for me. So I really believe in them, as if they can answer to your needs at that time, they can be completely, they can completely change the course of your work. And at the time, I was working 3 jobs, and it was a paid residency. There was a stipend, and I'd never in my whole life, I don't know how old I was, maybe 40. So I wasn't that young, but I was young in other ways. But yeah, but I'd never spent like 7 weeks without working in a normal job, and it was completely life-changing for me to do that. And it really made me understand what I wanted to do with my life, which was to kind of architect a path where this is the only thing I do, is make work. So it was a really special and important thing for me to have done it then. And I think that it can be like one of the most beneficial things, but I think I understand also that it's very hard to like cater to each person's needs. But I do think that there could be, maybe if people are thinking about different models of doing this, I mean, it could be interesting to have a model where an artist would kind of be more direct how they would want to, the structure of it in of itself. Like, I'd like to be somewhere rural where I don't talk to anybody, or I do want to be with people and have, like conversations every night. Or so I think there could be like more kind of diversity in terms of thinking of what people need at different points in their life, for sure.
Is this something you've encountered, Robert, within your interactions with some of the residents?
Yeah, I mean, because the way that it works for us is that we issue the open call, and the terms of the open call are very specific. So people apply kind of knowing the ins and outs of it to begin with. But I definitely think that there are different kinds of residencies that exist, obviously in London, like the kind of main ones for international artists, Gasworks and Delphina Foundation, but there are also elsewhere in like Wising, there's Cove Park. So there are kind of others where you can spend more intensive time, like alone, often in a very beautiful place that's a bit more beautiful than like Lambeth. But I would say that also for the artists that visit, like we try to be very flexible in terms of how they spend their time. And we literally say to people, like, you know, this time is yours, and like, if you want to spend all your time in the studio making work, that's fine. But also you're in London, like, we have these like institutional icon cards that we give out so they can get into places for free. And there's often so much that you can access and see. Like, Mar's literally seen everything. And I think that's kind of incredible too. But I think the thing that I wish that we were able to change more, and Ty touched on it, is the specific conditions, you know, in terms of like supporting people with families and or like none of the residencies tend to have an age cap, but inevitably, because of where people are at in their lives, usually people are like under 40, let's say, so between like 25 and 40 is probably the kind of the main group that we tend to get, and because we own a 5-bed house where the artists stay, we can't accommodate a family, we can't accommodate partners. So it becomes difficult to kind of think more expansively about that. But fundamentally, the only thing stopping that is like a lack of resource. Like, so if we could access like another flat or like, you know, or to be flexible. And we did do it about 18 months ago. We did a project with an artist called Marie-Claire Montlambienne, who is based in Paris, and while we were working together, had a young child, and so actually she did a residency leading to a show, and we brought her over and we put her up in a house in East Dulwich with like her mum and the baby, and it was like more expensive than the residency, you know, to get that temporary accommodation for 3 months, because London is ridiculous. So
No, I think it's a very good point about the artist needs, and I feel like in our research as well, and then thinking about this exhibition, we found, of course, certain artists have different needs. For instance, I know that you recently, I think, did an open call for artists from Algeria and Palestine. And coming from Turkey myself, you know, with a lot of my artist friends who are in their mature years, for them it's a big opportunity to be able to go to the British Museum and see a work of art. And, you know, when we were thinking about Kudzanay, in one of her interviews, she says how during her residency she ended up seeing an Alice Neal show, and that made her think about the small format and like the scale. So I guess also still for a lot of artists who are maybe not from here or born here, that kind of interaction and also maybe that access to new audiences is kind of you know, a great opportunity. But I'm wondering if you would like to add anything to our conversation. Soon I'm going to open it up, I think, for questions, but yeah, it's open to questions. Yeah. Thank you so much for this lovely conversation. Yes, if you have any questions, now is the time.
For Robert, I guess, I know you mentioned the residencies are kind of have strict application guidelines, but what is it you're kind of looking for in artists that apply? Is it like kind of early exhibition success, or is there something more abstract?
Yeah, I think it depends, and we obviously stew on this a lot. So in terms of the actual application, as I said, we get significant numbers applying, and then there's a long listing process. So our curator and I often go through and make like a long list of like 10 to 15 names, and then we'll have a shortlisting meeting, which usually involves a curator from or linked to the particular region. And so they will advise, they will also look at the kind of full list of applications and be like, hey, this person is interesting, you should check it out. So that kind of informal guidance is really helpful. And then we'll do Zoom interviews with like 3 to 5 candidates, and then make a final decision. So it's difficult to say in kind of certain terms, but in a way it's a little bit alchemical. And obviously we're always trying to form a cohort too. So like, you know, as I said, Mara's here with a group. The next group are people from India, Pakistan, Algeria, Palestine, and Canada. And so we kind of do it in waves. So we'll do a bunch of shortlisting and interviewing within a period of about a month, and we'll be trying to form a group. So presumably, like, we'll be thinking not everybody should be like a figurative painter, or not everybody should be like, you know, making work about the same issues. Obviously, some residencies are useful, but you also want it to be like a diverse cohort. So I think that's part of it. And the other thing that we also say is that we're not always looking for the quote-unquote best artist, not that that's even possible, but it's really thinking about who we think stands to benefit most from the opportunity at that point in time. We also do encourage people to like reapply, and it's often very close. And we often always feel like when we make a decision selecting one artist, we're also simultaneously making like 4 bad decisions. So it's a quite like traumatic process, I would say, and inevitably we have to be quite savage in terms of how we assess. And we also, because we're a small team, we're not able to provide like feedback to people, so that is like a bone of contention for some people, but we just don't have the infrastructure to enable it. And so, I don't know if I'm answering your question, but I'm kind of talking you through the things and the thoughts that we kind of go through when we're trying to make the decision. And I would also say that in some contexts, we're also thinking specifically about the visa scenario. So a lot of the countries are they're visa concession countries, so it's not so much of an issue. But a lot of people need visa sponsoring, and we are a registered sponsor. And in some contexts, it's much, much easier for people to travel. So, you know, we're not concerned about people coming from Brazil or Canada. I think they're both visa concession anyway, as we are artists coming from sub-Saharan Africa, for example. And so if you get single men artists applying from that context and they don't have enough of an exhibition history to demonstrate to like a border force agent, then they're never going to get their visa. And so we have to think a little bit kind of carefully about the specific conditions of where people are applying from. And likewise, when we did the call for Palestine, our main concern was whether or not Palestinian artists would be able to get a visa. And luckily, she got it last week, so it worked out. But I think it's kind of all of these things.
So much. I have so many thoughts and comments, but it's really interesting to hear you speak about how, you know, how residencies work, what they mean, the fact that they need to happen at a very specific time, and they can sometimes they can be beneficial, sometimes they may have different effects, and how it's a constant negotiation between an established network of friends, but also trying to break from it. Because you don't want to just, you know, represent that one art world friends. But also, as you were talking, it felt like there was so much affinity between the work, but not just the residency, but also from the perspective of an institution, and also you moving for sort of artistic research with that of a university. So we also do, you know, admissions. We also are very concerned about visas. We also are always thinking about, is this the right time for this person to be doing this, or are they just going to suffer through this process and not really gain anything from it? And I also know that each of you in different ways have a porous relationship with the universities. And so I guess my question is about that, the institution of the university, and how you think about it. But then also, kind of adjacently to this question is, you know, if we were to go on strike, why would we go on strike? And what kind of infrastructure, from an educational and, you know, sort of artistic point of view, what is the urgency for strike? Sorry, very good.
It's a big question. I mean, there are many strikes happening all the time. I think striking in the context of an academic or university background is I have been on strike as a tutor at the Royal College of Art many times, and the demands are very kind of, they're often material. They're around hours, pay, holiday, student workload. You know, they're very kind of concrete demands. I think when strikes are called out in the art world, they're more, as like for practitioners, let's say, they are more not nebulous, but like they're more abstract in a sense, but they are also material, obviously, but they have like kind of more, I think, overarching narratives in terms of what they're trying to address. Like for me personally, I think that what we should be striking is censorship in the art world around topics like Palestine. I think that's a really big thing. And yeah, I think that's something that's really changing the art world. I think people are self-censor around it. I do it myself. I think it creates a very conservative atmosphere where also that becomes reflected in the work that people produce. So I think that question of repression of specific politics, but then the allowance of others and how that also reflects back on it. What happens to, you know, a certain kind of political question when it's siloed from the reality we live in? Like, does it, you know, can it really ask a question in an environment that refuses to acknowledge reality? So I think to me that would be what I would be striking for sure.
Yeah, there's a lot in this. I should say my partner's an academic, so we definitely talk about this. And whenever we get on the topic of like how abundantly screwed the art world is, how abundantly screwed academia and universities is also is usually trumps it somehow. But I think, you know, I think in terms of the university context, I think like fractionalization is an insane thing that's going on right now. I have so many friends that are artists or academics that are like on the front line of this interaction between, you know, representing a course or, you know, a certain department and wanting to support their students and feeling connected to them and having very little support from the academic kind of university infrastructure behind them. And so I think that you feel kind of screwed in both directions. I think that's really a problem. And I think it's something that also can happen to artists in the kind of broader field. I think one of the things that I also think about in Gasworks context in relation to being in London and being connected to some of the debates in the art world about like boycotting or striking or having a kind of certain, taking a certain moral high ground over a particular issue is how complex that becomes when you start to work with artists in places where there often is little to no infrastructure. And so whereas artists here can make decisions about not wanting to take money from certain sources, for example, that is really, really, really difficult if you're in a place where there just is no other option. And so I think that conversation becomes a lot more nuanced when it's internationalized in a way which doesn't make it easier to resolve, but I think that speaks to the kind of nebulousness of striking also in an art world context, which is international, full of very diverse perspectives, full of people who are rooted in very specific locations, but meet all of the same friends in different biennial art world, art festival, art fair contexts that they travel to. So yeah, it's complex.
Should I add to that? I mean, to add to it, I think, you know, like one thing that I think is really interesting that's happened with this kind of climate of censorship is even, you know, like if I think back 10 years, you know, like Marxist work that was like kind of explicitly Marxist in its way of treating its subject matter, what was just like the normal, that was just like the norm, and that was kind of, it was never something that was contested, like the kind of idea of equality being good, the sanctity of life being important. These were not contested things at all, and it's interesting to see how even, you know, words like what happens is that it's viral. censorship is viral, and it also then means that even words like communism become like tricky in the art world. And I think, I just wanted to add to that. I think we have to really think carefully about what things do in terms of ecologies of thinking and representation, because it feels like a very dangerous moment to me.
I just wanted to add to this because you mentioned ecologies and the importance of unionizing and artist unions that are forming more and more, and not only artist unions but cultural workers unions. For example, Art Workers Italia that started during the pandemic from a group of cultural workers and artists in Italy to fight for basic needs such as the recognition of their profession, healthcare during a pandemic, then transformed into strikes and initiatives to go against censorship in institutions and speak for Palestine, for example. And there are regular strikes that are happening in the recent year even more, thanks to the fact that they're unionizing and also collaborating with realities internationally. So it isn't just a local movement, and I think this is a way to have the strike or the conversation that needs to happen to move forward. But I would say a reason to strike today, it's really basic needs and that have to do with work and support, really.
Hi, thank you so much. I was wondering, in light of all of the needs that you're aware of and working so directly with artists, how that shapes your curatorial practice and your responsibility as a curator. So working so directly with the artists, as a curator, how does that influence your practice, as opposed to working in a museum context?
Okay. Well, of course it's great. I love it because then I guess that's how it starts most of the time. I feel like I've worked with Thai even before and we did an exhibition at Clima in Milan together with Thai Clacrisi, who's now showing at Bold Tendencies. And even before that, even before the exhibition, I feel the conversation and the work really started in the studio. And I feel that's a very big part of the work because that's also how the thinking develops and how the ideas develop through that encounter. So if we want to not have it linked to a space, it will probably be it will be the studio or places where art doesn't usually live. So maybe an example I can give is when I was working for Rupert Center for Art and Education in Vilnius, in Lithuania, and with the alternative education program curator, Adomas Narkevičius at the time, we decided to move out of the institution and to work with a community of a rural town in Lithuania to really bring art and conversations and research into this town. And there was no infrastructure for art there. It was just a lady who had a house and wanted to make it available for people to stay and to have exchanges with younger people because she was afraid that they would leave and would not return. Or would move to bigger cities. And that is a way that I feel like this was 2018, and I still think back to it today, how not necessarily the work needs to culminate in an exhibition or in a formal setting, but in these exchanges and the ideas. And just before starting this conversation, we were talking about it with Ty and Tom, that sometimes there isn't enough of that idea exchange before the finished product. So I like to bring that on the table.
Thank you.
Is that something that you, because I know that not all residents at Gasworks definitely have to do an exhibition, but I wonder in terms of like similar concerns, how do you think about audience and how does curatorial practice relate to your experience in the foundation of the residency model?
Yeah, I mean, most residents don't do a show. We do have one partnership that enables us to work with a resident artist from anywhere in the world and then develop an exhibition with them. But it's the kind of exception to the rule, let's say. And in terms of how the artists engage with the public, I think generally speaking, like it tends to be much more intimate in terms of like one-on-one conversations with like curators or patrons groups that come through or other artists that you'll meet. So we do like a cute little social thing with the Delphina Foundation residents, like every cohort. And then there's the open studio, which just took place on Saturday. So it's a really nice day and it's very informal, like throughout the day on the weekend, where anyone can come through and you can have conversations with them about the work you've been developing. But I think in a sense, the residency is not kind of envisioned as something which has the kind of public at heart. It's really about an artist's professional development thing. And the exhibitions are obviously more publicly oriented, and we usually work with artists over a kind of 2-year period to develop a new commission that's then presented in London for the first time. So it's kind of, it's a slightly different like temperature. That also feels like it's a kind of, it's deeply connected to this notion of artist development, but in a slightly different way. And the other thing that I would say to the question over here is that I think terms and conditions are really important. And I mentioned before that having very clear kind of understanding of what the residency opportunity is from what is quite a dry document is actually a really useful thing in terms of what people understand they're applying for. And likewise, I think things like contracting, clarity around fees is really, really important in terms of running an institution that feels kind of like it's trying to be as progressive as possible within what are very challenging circumstances. And obviously, you know, like our fee, for example, for exhibitions is £3,500, which when you think about it in terms of the number of solo shows in institutions equivalent to Gasworks that artists are doing a year is completely ridiculous. And actually it should be something closer to 15 or 20. But we don't live in a world where we can fundraise from public or private sources that much money to push it towards artists in that way. And likewise, you know, our staff are paid okay compared to like benchmark rates with other organisations, but could definitely be paid more. Everybody is underworked and overpaid. Everybody works long hours. And so I think that it's not a field that you enter in order to be handsomely paid. But I think it's something that you enter because you love it. But I think sometimes people do exploit the fact that people need to love it in order to operate in the environment and survive.
Thank you. Any more questions?
Thank you so much for a really interesting conversation. Two probably very separate questions, but I guess I'm just wondering if you could say a little more about how these residencies are funded. Like, I mean, you know, partially thinking about the sort of institutional structures that we are seeing censoring some political issues that, of course, sort of gets us to the question of, right, like how can we build these networks of care that can sort of save us from sort of institutional censoring, but also, you know, not even going into politics, like just thinking about the massive attack on humanities, right? I mean, just thinking about, you know, like all of us who are involved in this kind of creative production, like we know exactly how important it is to have 3 months in London to get to know the city, to start thinking about projects. But it's not exactly, you know, a great selling idea for, you know, for like proposals where they're constantly sort of asked to specify the kind of outcomes and, you know, productivity and all of that. So I'm just really, it would be just really helpful if you a little bit more about where you find and how you raise money. And if I may have another, again, very sort of different question, if we are thinking about residency, it seems like today, especially on the boards around the world, where I think more and more see residency quite specifically as a political gesture, a residency is very often sort of a form of, saving people whose homes have become war zones, and a residency can actually be a form of survival. And sort of thinking about that, I'm just curious if you could sort of speak more a little bit about the potentials, but also the limitations of residency for that really important politics. Because of course it's incredible to provide some safe and some safety, but it also, life-threatening situations, of course, it also has limits. So I'm just sort of curious if you could say a little bit more about maybe sort of long-term forms of care that can emerge from residencies. Thank you.
Would you like to?
Yeah, okay. So in terms of how the residencies are funded, as I said before, they're all funded by trusted foundations, individuals, or like groups of individuals. And because Gasworks has been set up since 1994, doing residencies in this kind of way, it's developed a reputation, and so we find ourselves in the very fortunate position now where we're not really having to actively sell the residencies to funders. But usually people are approaching us that are keen to support artists from particular countries or regions. And so then for us the question is more about how we can sustain existing partnerships with funders that have supported for a long time that we want to maintain, how we can also diversify where people are coming from, and how we can ensure that whoever will be supporting passes the due diligence checks about ethical fundraising policy. So it's kind of thinking through how these various elements in order to kind of shape the program as it develops over time. The other thing that we've introduced is a 3-year minimum commitment to make sure that we have like sustained engagement with particular countries or regions, so it isn't just like a flash in the pan thing. But in terms of the longer term commitment, specifically in relation to like areas that are currently experiencing conflict, for example, I think that's a much thornier issue. And I wouldn't say that the 3-month residency at Gasworks is not gonna save someone's life when they're in a life-threatening situation in a particular place. But I guess the way we see it is an opportunity to tell positive stories about places where the news these days is so often deeply, deeply negative, and it's just talking about atrocity and death and suffering, and it feels really meaningful to be able to platform artists and culture and creativity in a way which is more hopeful and more optimistic and presents a more positive image of these artists and the places that they come from. But I think that there are other initiatives that are much more keyed into longer term support. So when we were setting up the residency for Palestinian artists, for example, we were in dialogue with an organisation in Spain that was trying to set up a kind of extended residency model for Palestinian artists within the Schengen area. So they would spend like 6 months in Spain, then they would spend 6 months in France, and they were trying to kind of connect up these various initiatives run by charities on a shoestring, often by volunteers, to be able to host artists longer term and their families from Palestine, for example. And I think that that is a kind of different objective in terms of trying to really bring people out to a place and ensure their safety. And the other conversations I had with artists around setting up the residency were also about, the need for there also to be residencies for Palestinian artists in Palestine. And one of the biggest challenges that the community faces is that people are being taken out and given safe haven or an opportunity elsewhere, and they're not necessarily returning. And this obviously plays into the IDF endgame. So,
yeah. Yes, I think it kind of really goes back to some of these ideas that we started out with when we were thinking about the exhibition, because we started out when we first had the opportunity to look at the Fiorucci collection. The first work that all of us as budding curators kind of were drawn to was the work by Etel Adnan, and of course her work is so much kind of not only her work but her poetry and her writing is so much a part of her experience of not being able to live where she, of course leaving Lebanon, but also this perpetual sense of having to be on the move, which is kind of I don't know what that means in terms of artistic mobility today, but it's an idea that we almost all of us kind of can relate to, because even if we look at our phones and look at what's happening in the world, we kind of have an idea of where home is for us, and in our practices, in our institutions, but then it feels like there's this constant kind of undercurrent of fear and loss and potential, displacement. But we are so very happy, and I'm just wondering if there are any more questions. If not, we would love to. Oh, sorry, Rose.
Thank you. I had a question for Ty and for Ma, which maybe ties into your show proposal as well. Maybe a little negative, but what did you miss the most when you were in your residency at Rising, Ty, and when you've been here at Gasworks, Ma, and what is the first thing you're going to do when you get back to Indonesia?
That question is a big one, and I think my answer for that is a developing one too. But I don't know, I guess I just try to utilize everything that I've kind of experienced and learned here and see if I can apply that back to the ecosystem back home as well. Because, I guess being Indonesian, you're kind of on strike every day, and given things politically there, it's not the best, but that's another topic for another day. I don't know, I think what I'm missing about home right now is just my daily routine, my family, my friends that I haven't seen for the past 2.5 months here. But I don't know. I don't know if that answered your question, but I guess we'll just have to see.
Similar. I'm quite an unconventional person in the way I live, and I really, when I leave a situation where I feel somehow supervised, I really enjoy being back in the freedom of going to bed extremely late, sleeping really late in the morning, having a good time, listening to music very loudly. There are many things that I really enjoy about daily life that I find in these it is really interesting because we use the word family, but it is, these are very professionalized environments ultimately. And always felt a relief when I'd get home and, be able to kind of live in a kind of invisible way, which I think that's the thing that I always found difficult, was living conspicuously, like breathing conspicuously, moving around, just being supervised, I guess, to a degree. Yeah.
This is for Robert and Mark. I wonder, Robert, during your time as curator and director, have you learned something from one of the residents that may have changed the way you look at something or think about something? And for Mark, similar to Rosa's question, what will you bring from your experience here when you're back in Indonesia, and how you approach your practice moving forward? Or was there something that you learned here, that you encountered, that has changed your perspective?
There's a lot of things that I learned, but also a lot of things that I had to unlearn. Pretty much these preconceived ideas I had about art and making, or just being a maker in general. For what I would bring back home, I think try to adopt this certain approach to care as well, especially particularly for artists. Before I was even I did part-time work as being an artist liaison for a residency in Bali. And I think it's just important to have these certain dialogues, whether it is between other artists as well. I think I just want to see if I could try to apply the same Not that I don't know if it would be in the form of like starting my own residency as well, but it's more just of like maybe opening up a studio and then inviting anybody from the world or any artists or artist practitioners just to sit down and have a conversation and stay for like a week or something and see what conversations we can have from that too. I don't know if that answered your question.
My answer is going to sound a little bit over the top, but I would say that I genuinely feel like I learned something important from each of the cohorts we have. And if I think about recent cohorts, you know, we had an artist from Lebanon called Omar Mizmar who was in residence September to December last year, and we organised a screening of one of his recent films at the ICA. And I genuinely think it's one of the best pieces of artist film I've seen in so many years. And it was a film that was made with incredibly simple means. Literally just him sat in a kind of beautician's like Botox like studio in the outskirts of Beirut when the war was breaking out initially in Israel. And it was an incredible film, and so much of I think particularly it's like a disease in the UK. There's like this notion that as an artist making moving image, you kind of have to step up to this like kind of like expanding your practice by like growing the team, like building the production value of it in a way which is often actually in direct contradiction to like the quality of the work. And actually things made really simply can often be the best things. Or if I think about like the January to April cohort, we had an artist from Mexico, Paloma Contreras Lomas, who's going to do a show with us at the end of the year. And I think I've rarely met anybody that really doesn't give a fuck before in my life. Pardon my French. But there's something about this like really punk attitude to like making and like being in the world, which feels very connected to her situation in Mexico City, but feels quite divorced from like the art world that I know in London today. And it's quite nice to have someone from a very different context who, is just quite kind of like punk in their outlook and attitude, and thinking how weirdly that rubs up against my kind of like day-to-day experience of the art world here, in a way that's also productive. And then like, to be really cheesy, but like the wonderful thing about Open Studios on Saturday was that when we came into the building, all of the artists were like dancing to like Afro beats that the Ghanaian artists brought, like with absolute like buoyance and like jubilance. And it was so wonderful to, as much as we talk and we can think critically about this notion of family, like I really do think that Gasworks is quite good at like conjuring that, and it's just wonderful to see people from all over the world that didn't know each other 2.5 months ago having this kind of relationship that feels like very incredibly positive and inspiring.
Should be protected.
Should be protected. Yeah.
I think this might be also a good time for us as the curatorial team to say thank you, artists, and also thank you, of course, Nicoletta, Robert, and China, that we actually really felt like we were part of a small family while we were doing this exhibition, and now we're kind of mourning what's going to happen next. But I think this experience actually has been amazing for all of us to get to know, your work, to get to know all these interesting collaborations and infrastructures between the Nicoletta Fiorucci Foundation, the Gasworks residency, and also all of these other kind of networks in London. We really feel very, very grateful for all of your support, and I feel like it's time for a drink maybe. But thank you very much for joining us today.